as the birthplace of American rowing, but in its continued role as one of the most significant rowing venues in the country. We continue to immortalize the stories of the Schuylkill legends and grow the opportunities for legends in the making. We invite you to build your own story and to be part of the tradition of the best head race in the world.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Jennifer Wesson, and I am the Executive Director of the Head of the Schuylkill Regatta. On behalf of our Board of Directors, in partnership with Philadelphia City Rowing, we welcome you and thank you for joining us tonight for a conversation with Arshay Cooper and the panel of friends he's assembled to discuss the root causes of racial inequities and how rowing can become a more inclusive sport. Mary Mazzio's A Most Beautiful Thing is based upon Arshay's memoir, Suga Water, also republished under the name A Most Beautiful Thing. We hope you found the film moving, and we also encourage you to read Arshay's book. The head of the Schuylkill Regatta began a conversation with Mary a year and a half ago before she had started shooting the film. And we talked about showing the trailer at the 2019 regatta to promote the movie and possibly getting Arshay and the Chicago police team to row here. We recruited the Philadelphia police boat team for that cause. The trailer and Arshay did not work out last year, but we were successful at getting the police on the water in Philadelphia. And we had PCR train them in the weeks leading up to the regatta. So we established a relationship to build upon. Tonight, we are encouraged by the viewership, by wanting to be here for this conversation and all that is to come. We have a responsibility to examine what we think we know, and we won't be perfect, but we will work on it side by side. Just a few housekeeping notes before I introduce Catherine Reddick of the Philadelphia City Rowing. And you are able to interact this evening by placing comments in the comment field, and we will pull in your questions for Arshay and the group. We want to thank you for your generous donations that you've made to Philadelphia City Rowing. And just remind everybody that all proceeds from race entries are going to Philadelphia City Rowing this year, and entries are still open through Friday. So with that, I want to introduce Catherine Reddick. Catherine is a member of Philadelphia City Rowing, our close partner for many years. Catherine grew up outside of Chicago and started rowing as a freshman at the University of Pennsylvania. She rowed competitively after college and represented the U.S. at the 2011 Pan Am Games. For the past 10 years, she has worked to help establish Philadelphia City Rowing as one of the most competitive, inclusive, scholastic rowing programs in the country. PCR maintains a culture that reaches under-resourced young people, puts students first, and is inclusive, transformative, and engaged with the community. In her professional life, she is a principal at Mercator Advisors, a consulting firm specializing in transportation infrastructure finance. So, Catherine, I'm going to turn it over to you for opening thoughts and let you introduce Arshay Cooper.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you to the head of the Schuylkill for the opportunity to have this conversation tonight and for their continued support of PCR. The Philly rowing community, like everything else in this town, including the water, has a very distinctive and unique flavor. I've been rowing on the Schuylkill for the past 19 years, and every day I've been aware of the lack of diversity on the water and a culture off the water that was often unwelcoming to me as a Black woman. And while I will concede that Philly is special, the lack of racial and ethnic diversity, equity, and inclusion in our rowing community is not. So I'm pleased to welcome our panel tonight and to learn from their experiences in Chicago, New York, Pittsburgh, and elsewhere, and to reflect on Arshay's story and what it should mean for all of us as rowers and as humans. Since hopefully everyone has seen the film, A Most Beautiful Thing, you know where he came from. But today, Arshay Cooper is still a rower, but also an award-winning author, motivational speaker, and activist, particularly around the issues of accessibility for low-income families. He's also been a key voice in the rowing community, raising the profile of the issues we're here to discuss tonight and moving many hearts and minds along the way. So, Arshay?
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, head of the Schuylkill Regatta, for having me. I am so excited to be here today and introduce my friends. And I hope that most of you, or all of you, enjoyed A Most Beautiful Thing, produced by our amazing rower, Mary Mazia, who is lovely and so talented. Again, my dream was always to see that each boathouse in every city reflects the diversity in its city and give everyone an opportunity to row and learn the lessons that the rowing has to teach you. And I am, again, so excited to dive deep a little bit into some of the obstacles that we face when it comes to reaching young people that grew up like I did in the sport of rowing. And there's many young people who look like me who didn't grow up like me, but still deserve an opportunity to be a part of this sport. And a most beautiful thing is not a charity story, but it's a story when young people get opportunities, they have a chance to rise, and they will compete, and they would do whatever it has to take to be a part of this country. And I'm so excited. So first, I want to introduce one of our first coaches, Jessica Smith. I also want to introduce Richard Butler. Also want to introduce Denise Aquino. And I want to introduce Horlui. Hey guys, I'm super excited to have you. And before we start, I want to go ahead and want you guys to make some introductions. But I want to start with Jessica, who I met in the lunchroom many, many years ago in 1997. And it was just awesome having you a part of the team. You were so tough. You pushed me to be competitive, to be strong in the boat and outside of the boat. And I would love for you to go ahead and just give a quick 60 to 90-second introduction.
Well, I'm Jessica Smith, formerly Jessica Van de Vussy. That was the name I was under when I was coaching Arshay. I have been, coaching rowing is how I fell into teaching. So in 1997, I started teaching science when I thought, how hard could it be to teach, So 25 years later, I'm still in the classroom and coaching rowing when I can and getting on the water when I can. But I'm just a mom, a coach, and a teacher, and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessica. Next, I want to go ahead and introduce Richard Butler. After I wrote my memoir, my self-published memoir, Suga Water, in 2015, someone sent Richard a message about this kid, Arshay Cooper, who just wrote this book. And he reached out to me right away and said, come and speak at the U.S. Rowing Convention in Philly a few years back. And so I'm excited to have you, Richard.
Thank you, Arshay. It's pretty amazing to be here with you on yet another panel, just saying. And so just briefly, my background, I was the first African-American executive director of a rowing program, Three Rivers Rowing in Pittsburgh. I also became the first Black person to become the inclusion manager for USA Rowing. I have served on U.S. Olympic Committee's Diversity Committee, and presently I co-chair the U.S. Rowing's Diversity Committee. And I'm just so happy to be here to just share my experiences.
Awesome. Thank you, Richard. Next, I want to introduce another good friend of mine. We worked together at Row New York. We used to work at Row New York together, and we done some great things. One of the things I thought was pretty cool that we created was an indoor rowing and entrepreneurship program called ERO that really made an impact on young people's lives back in New York City. But now have the best podcast I ever heard, Rowing in Colors. Denise, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Arshay. Hi, everyone. My name is Denise Aquino, former director of community rowing at Row New York. I worked there for 7 years. Started rowing at Binghamton University. Shout out to Amy Messersmith. I see you in the comments. I have a master's in youth studies, which means I completely focused on, my studies focus on after-school youth programming. So it intersects what we do in the rowing world with what we have learned with research-backed practices. And aside from that, I have 15 plus years of experience in the sport, coaching mostly folks from low-income backgrounds, mostly people with disabilities, and now, as Arshay mentioned, am the proud founder and co-host, along with Patricia Justine, co-host of the Rowing in Color podcast. So very happy to do that. And I shout out to Arshay for giving us that inspiration and for guiding us along the way.
Thank you, Denise. Next, last and not least, I want to introduce Horlui. We work together. He's a social worker at Row New York and done a lot of great work in the city of New York and in the Bronx, and also a veteran who rode there in New York City. So Horlui, take it away.
Hi, thank you very much. So my name is Horlui Silao. I'm a first generation Latinx New Yorker, raised in the Bronx. Have over 10 years in public service, master's degree in public administration and master's degree in social work. And so I've been in the field of social services and youth development for many years, and I really love the work. And as Arshay mentioned, as a veteran, I started rowing through a veterans rowing program, which was an amazing experience. And yeah, I fell in love with the sport. It's awesome. And so now I am, as a New York State licensed social worker, I continue working with youth, but in the capacity with families and serving the Bronx as a resident of the Bronx. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and take it away. I am super excited again to be with everyone for the head of the school. I remember, Jessica, many years, 22 years ago, the first time I ever got on the water at the school, it really made an impact on my life. But I want to go ahead and start off with Denise. But before I ask you this question, I remember when rowing first came to my school, and I walked into the lunchroom and I saw this boat. And it was beautiful. I've never seen a boat in my life. And, and behind the boat was this TV monitor, and they was showing the Olympic Games. And they was giving everyone this opportunity, right? This opportunity to do something awesome and to row. And although I knew it seemed great, there was a little bit of hesitation that the images on the TV monitor of the people that's rowing the boat and the fans didn't reflect the images of the people that I'm used to seeing every day. So even though it seemed great, I hesitated. And not only that there's hesitation within young people, because we all spent time recruiting kids in school to the sport of rowing, there's also some systemic obstacles that young people face when recruiting kids that grew up in low-income communities. What are some of those hesitations, not only from young people, but from their parents? And what are some of the obstacles and challenges we have when recruiting kids of color in low-income communities?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad that you're asking this question, because I know that some of the work that we've done is actually going into the schools and recruiting and doing this for hundreds of hours, not just one time of year, but all year round. And you mentioned the parents, and that's such an important point, because if you don't have the parents involved, then you're not going to have the students involved. Parents, guardians, grandparents, whoever, they need to be on board. They need to trust you. And I'm going to emphasize trust. They need to trust you, because if they don't trust you, within a school, within a church, wherever you are doing the recruitment, how are they going to trust you as the coach on the water in an environment where there's too many variables, where there's so many things that can go wrong? So trust, building that trust right off the bat, relationship building, and just getting to know folks and empathizing with them, understanding, getting to know differences and getting to be open to those differences is something that I want to say is a hybrid of systemic and also just personal and social. But to answer your question, going on with what's systemic, I mean, there's trust, there's transportation, there's cost. I think The Atlantic just came out with this article on how rowing is one of those niche sports that the 1% really aim towards, and it's basically affirmative action for the 1%. So how can we have lower income students competing with the 1%, a niche sport in the niche sport? We're not really setting them up because of this conversation right here. Trust, safety, acknowledging the differences. I mean, when I first walked into the recruiting session, I called it out, said, "Hi, I am a 20-something-year-old, and you can trust me with your, just calling it right there, and showing that you are someone that the parents can trust, that the parents can communicate with, and someone who's willing to do the work in order to understand where the students are coming from." I'll end with one example. So in all my years of coaching, I've had way too many instances where I've had to walk a student. I coached middle schoolers for a number of years, and I had to walk a student to the shared food table where all the teams were sharing the food, and it was free food. It was called Middle School Super Sprint, so it was a good race. And the kid who was wearing full regatta uniform, his Middle School Super Sprint t-shirt, his trowel, the mother at the food table asked him, "Oh, are you a rower here?" Why he should be questioned for being a rower at a regatta shouldn't even be a concern. And like, safe to say, he was a young Black boy, just a little bit taller than me. I'm 5'0". The fact that he had to experience that so early in his rowing career, no wonder he had to reach out and ask his coach, who doesn't look any more like anyone at the food table, for assistance. And I think that in little moments like this, gonna call it out again, just gonna call it out, the microaggressions that we have, which aren't necessarily systemic, but they are social and they are prevalent, are what are the foundation of what prevents folks from feeling like they belong, from seeing themselves in this sport. So I know you asked about the systemic barriers, but I want to emphasize the personal, social ones as well.
Horley, do you want to add to that? You unmute yourself.
I think that some of the challenges are just the not understanding of the community that the outreach is trying to be tapped into, and the intentions are well and they're good and they're positive. But I think there are some additional steps that can be taken in not just recruiting diversity, but being prepared for it. And so that's something that's work that's put in on both sides, where the space can be created where that communication can exist in a safe way, and where neither the management, the staff will feel uncomfortable in that process, and as a result, the students that are being recruited or the young folks that are being recruited will sense that discomfort as well, and so it's just kind of awkward. But there's always the opportunity to recover from that, and it just involves just having that open conversation amongst all parties.
All right, before we move on, I want to give Jessica and Richard, you have an opportunity to comment on the first question.
Go, Jessica. It's you, Jessica.
All right. I connected to what Denise was saying about building those relationships with the community, gaining that membership and building trust and understanding. And, when I'm reflecting on what are the mistakes that a lot of coaches make, as they come in with this idea of what they're going to do, and they don't co-create it with the community they're in. That's a mistake I made. It doesn't create a safe space for kids to feel like they can share their experience and engage in a sport openly and feel like you said, like they belong, or not even if they belong, but it's a safe place for them. Like, if you go on Maslow's hierarchy here, it has to be safe before they can, anything else can happen. So I definitely can connect with what both of you are saying.
I just did a 90-minute training session on microaggressions. And so when you were talking to Denise, I'm going microaggressions to that young Black man. I have been race director of Three Rivers Rowing, head of the Ohio, and have had parents and board members of other rowing clubs ask me, why am I there? But I'm not here to complain. And so something that came to mind is stereotypes plus implicit bias equals microaggressions. And so if you're saying that you want to be diverse and inclusive, then you're going to have to come to the truth of asking yourself a question. Do you really know the realities of the life experiences of the people that you would like to recruit to your boathouse?
Yeah, that makes sense. And then just want to stay on this for a little bit longer. I do think that makes sense. And we talked about also parents, right? And some of the hesitations that parents had. There's a part in the film where Malcolm talks about his dad really didn't want him to be a part of the rowing team. And then right away, I had people say, I can't believe he was, they're snatching an opportunity away from his son. And I think without knowing the background of the families and understanding the city like Chicago that was built on trauma, you had all these families who moved from the South because of Jim Crow laws and segregations and all the things they experienced. My grandmother moved to Chicago because her friend was hung on a tree. Malcolm's mom moved to Chicago because her brother was hung on a tree, right? And you move to Chicago and you're a red line and you have to stay in the neighborhood. You can't take out loans. You can't get a mortgage because of the color of your skin. And Malcolm's family experience in the South was so bad that he was afraid to put his son in a white space because maybe he has interacted with some of the grandmothers and some of the mothers of those kids who are rowing at the Lincoln Park Lagoon, right? And so, Jorge, can you talk to us a little bit about the hesitation with parents, and does it come from a good place?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I think so. To the point that you mentioned of the parents' experience and their concern for their concern for the experiences that their children might go through. Trauma is generational and it can be passed down. So many parents often, because of what they've gone through, they don't want their children to experience the very same thing, those negative experiences, those traumatic experiences. And so it's not so much that they don't believe that their children are capable of achieving those goals. They just fear what negative impact it could have on them. And so, and when you're when you have experiences that fear is a part of your day-to-day life, because there's many things that you have to be conscious of, and survival is kind of more at the forefront than really living. Those are the conversations that they're having with their children. And so, and we all know that whether it's their parents or anyone who is their caregiver or that support or role model, their participation in whether it's academics or athletics, is a critical support mechanism for their success. And if it's not their family, it's going to be someone else. And oftentimes it could be a coach, or it could be a mentor, or even a peer support. But there's always someone else they're going to depend on. So it's critical for them to really understand and feel that trust, like we were mentioning, trust built with the community.
Awesome. I'm going to move on to the next question. A lot of times when we talk about the importance of representation, which is important, one of the reasons, I said this is a great team for me and I want to stick it out is the fact that we did have a coach of color that was on our crew too, Coach Victor. Like, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that if we all started rowing, I was going to row with people who looked like me. But to be able to walk into the gym room and first see a woman coach, which was Jessica, in the 90s, that I didn't see a lot of women coaches for young men's teams, for basketball, football, volleyball. I just didn't see that. And most of us were raised by women, right? And most of our teachers were women. So to have a woman coach, I felt comfortable. Then to see a Black coach, right, showed me that, to have a person in leadership that looks like me showed me that I would be protected as well. That there's someone who's been through what I went through. And I thought that was super important. But Richard, we talked a little bit about the importance of representation, and we also talked a little bit about diversity. But can you talk about the importance of inclusion and equity and the difference between diversity, inclusion, and equity?
Cool. Thanks for all the hard questions. So first off, just wanted to mention the Great Migration went from 1915 to 1970. 6-point-something million Black people left the South to come to where we are today in the Northeast and the East Coast because of the lynchings. And just to really have you all that's listening today sit on this idea that in 1918, we finally got a law in Congress to describe how it's a hate crime to lynch people. Sit with that for a moment. 1918, and there were congressional leaders and senators who were still fighting that idea of how to classify lynching. And so as we go into this question about diversity, diversity without inclusion is tokenism. Period. You want to do your 1 week program with little brown and black kids? That's tokenism. You're not diversifying your rowing program. And so when we talk about inclusion, I like to use this analogy. It's really simple. Diversity is that you invited them to the boathouse and you check that box. Inclusion is that they have a voice within that boathouse. But equity is that you sat down with them and asked questions in the beginning before you sent the invites out to be part of the boathouse. And so if you're planning your programming to bring Black and brown and underrepresented and under-resourced youth or adults to your boathouse, you first, as a coach, as a board member, as a leader, have to unpack your own backpack and recognize what are your privileges to begin with. You have to unpack your assumptions about this group. You have to unpack that not all Black people are poor. I have a lot of private rowing clubs who have never thought about asking, they want to bring in youth rowing, but they're a master's program. Do you know that there are professional Black and brown and gay people that are attorneys and doctors and nurses? And so we have to really, I'm going to say, if you say you want to be inclusive, then I say you need to ask yourself some powerful questions. And the first one was, do you understand the realities of the experiences of the people that you would like to bring into your boathouse? Are you racially literate? And are you educating yourself on racial theories, gender identities? Are you educating yourself? So I'm sorry, but I was just in a training session with microaggressions and I'm feeling like balling up my fists.
Yeah, no, I thank you for that. 2 years ago, me and Jessica was in Philadelphia at my coach and her coach and ex-husband Michael Gorman's service. And that's when Mary Maziel was beginning to talk about the film. And a college coach walked up to me and said, "Oh yeah, you were Mike O'Gorman's pet project." And I was so upset. I mean, everything I've done for the sport, and I showed up every day. I was committed. I had calluses. I had back injuries, right? I've won every 2K I had in my city, every competition, right? And sometimes I see this when I go to a regatta and people will say, "Oh, that outreach program or that program with Black kids, they're slow on the water. They're just a special program," right? And when you look at those programs, when someone has the heart and the passion to go to a neighborhood where no one else wants to go and say, "I'm going to give an opportunity here and I'm going to listen to what the community wants," and starts a program. And I've been in many of these programs, and these programs have young Black kids who are committed, who can outrun anyone I know, are just as strong, just as powerful. They are resilient, but they have a boat that's 20 years old, right? That's been a hand-me-down forever, right? They only can afford to go 3 days a week. That's all they can afford. They can only go to one regatta, right? They can only afford to have a coach who just started coaching, right? But you can't get a coach to recognize them or a collegiate coach to see them, and they will be as talented as anyone I know, right? And it's an equity issue within the sport, and it's something that I hope that we can all work hard to solve, right? And I think that Arshay or Amanda Cross or Richard Butler or Rowan and Cullen cannot diversify the sport of rowing and give them the tools they need. Rowing has to diversify the sport of rowing and give them the tools they need to succeed. So really, thank you for hitting on that. Jessica, I don't know if you want to comment to anything I just said.
Arshay, before you go to Jessica, I just wanted to add that in my experience with U.S. rowing, I have set foot in so many boathouses that they still believe in the separate but equal that we lived through the Jim Crow laws. And so when you talked about that equipment, and it would just make me almost cry to leave that boathouse, and they thought they were doing good. and their intention may have been good, but separate but equal, friends, anyone listening, separate but equal is just wrong. I'm muting myself now.
Please don't. It's just, I think that what Richard was saying about you have to take a hard look at yourself. Like that is the first step when you enter into this arrangement of coaching and building trust and bringing young brown and Black people into a white community. And before anything, you have to, I think you have to get that inherent distrust of that homogenous white community. Like when you walk into the room and you don't see anybody of color, you have to ask yourself, why is it this way? Because it's for a reason, and it's not a good reason. And if hearing that makes you defensive, then you need to take a minute and think about, why am I getting defensive? Because there is a reason why people don't have access to the sport. And I think, and as a coach and as, a white person, you have to be willing to see it and call it what it is and have those uncomfortable conversations. And when you hear these microaggressions and these comments that you hear about hair and sunscreen and whatever, you need to call it what it is and point your finger at it and be honest and be like, listen, do you hear what you're saying? Like that is, you are digging at that young person's dignity right now. Do you not hear that? And I think as a coach, you have to be aware of that. And there's two different issues here. I was part of a program that was all African-American. I wasn't trying to bring young minorities into a white environment. And I think, as a coach, you really have to connect with your minority athletes, and you have to have those conversations with them. Like, how can I, be your advocate? What can I do, to make you feel included? And then when they come to you and they tell you some crazy stuff they hear in the locker room, you need to believe it. Like, believe it. They're not making it up, and I think, that and just listening, being willing to be uncomfortable. I had a front row seat as a young person. I grew up in a rural community, factory workers and farmers, and I had lots of opportunities, but I had a front row seat to poverty. And I'm going to tell you, white poverty is different than Black poverty. And if you don't think that if you don't believe that, you can go to Johns Hopkins, you can look at the Brookings Institute, you can go to University of Chicago's Urban Lab. There's all kinds of data out there that says that. So educate yourself about your community, understand your motivations, why you're there, what you're doing, build trust, and point to when it's wrong, say it's wrong. Like, don't succumb to the, oh, well, no one else is doing anything. And, at the end of the day, I was public school educated and I didn't fit into the rowing community, but I could pass. I could show up and blend in. And our young athletes can't do that. And it has to feel safe, and they have to trust you, and you have to, you have to build that space for it. And you have to be willing to be wrong and be okay with it. I'm gonna mute myself right now before I get in my soapbox.
No, so Jessica, I want to keep you on for a second. All right, I'm gonna go into the next question, and then right after you finish, Denise, I would love, because you recruited everywhere, and Horlu, you saw a lot with people who want to start programs in communities like we grew up in, but did not grow up like how we did. So I want to touch a little bit on that. But what are some of the mistakes that you say you made with our team? What are some of the mistakes that coaches make when wanting to diversify their program or wanting to go into a community like the West Side of Chicago?
Well, I think I showed up, like Richard said, I was well-intended, right? I had that quote, Malcolm X, by any means necessary, but I didn't pause to think, I didn't include my athletes and their families in that dialogue. It was just, that's white entitlement. I didn't think to do that. That was the first mistake. I think the second mistake was I didn't prepare you all for what it was going to feel like showing up at Lincoln Park Boat Club and like literally opening up that gate and walking through the gate, and like it was silent and people were, you know, looking, and you just all of a sudden it was like, what is going on? Like, you know, I think that whole interaction of crossing into that world, we didn't prepare for it. We didn't talk about it. We didn't anticipate what was going to happen. We didn't talk about what we could do to kind of, you know, mitigate that. And we didn't have a plan. I just showed up. So I think that you have to have a plan. You have to educate yourself. You know, you have to get some cultural competency training, like period. And you have to do it over and over again. It's not like a one and done thing. And I think you just have to be willing just to be uncomfortable and find some really good people who will call you on your, you know, I can't say it because we're in a public space, but people who are willing to call you on your stuff and make you own your side of the street, I think is another way. But, you know, and I think the last thing I've said it before, you just have to believe your athletes. Like, you can't minimize their experience. Like, oh, no, that didn't happen. That couldn't. No, you heard them wrong. Like, no, listen, believe, and then respond. And I, you know, personally, when I showed up in Chicago on the West Side, I thought, you know, I'm not very empathetic to my kids' experience. So I trucked myself down to Trinity on the South Side. I was going to go to church on Sunday, and you know, it was interesting to step into a completely homogenous community where I was the outlier, and having that sense of there's nowhere to hide for me here. You know, I am different, and people welcomed me. And I think, you know, really trying to make sure that you're constantly revisiting your athletes and their families, and you're going out of your way to include them and hear them and, you know, give them a voice and listen to them.
Yeah, I just want to comment on that, and I hand it over to you, Denise. You know, we, like, the sport was like, it was so powerful for me, you know, just to experience the water, right? It was the, you know, teachers used to call us a walking storm, and the sport was the one thing that calmed the storm in me. It was purely meditative for me, and it was magical for me. But I think about some of the other kids that were part of Manly that was like, I didn't know about this. It was the fact that, you know, when we walk into a boathouse, right? We share the boathouse with all these private schools, and, you know, the images on the wall, the languages didn't reflect the kids that we were trying to put in the seats in that boathouse. And that was something that I thought about all the time, right? And I think that's important for us to start to think about, because I've recruited kids. I mean, thousands of kids to the sport. People would bring me out, and we would speak in 10 schools in a week. And all these kids would show up at Learn to Row Day, and I would go back next year, and all the kids are gone. And these kids will walk into a boathouse that have all white kids, right? And these kids would say stuff, and they will write stuff, and no one prepared the boathouse. No one prepared even good white kids, that kids from the West Side or kids from other cities are going to come there, and they're going to be there, and they're going to be a part of the team. And it was awkward, and it was weird, and kids didn't want to come back because of that. And I think it's so important that we begin, as we want to diversify our programs, think about the images on the wall, the decor, think about talking to our kids, right? That is a part of that boathouse, about what you're trying to do and the importance of diversity and inclusion and equity, and how do we move, you know, our communities forward, our cities forward with the power of diversity. But Denise, do you want to touch on what we just talked about?
Yeah, I mean, going off of what Jessica said and what you said, Arshay, I mean, are there things in our boathouse that remind our students, remind our youth that this is not just a boathouse, but a home? Are there things in the boathouse? I know Richard Butler, you call it artifacts. Are there things in the boathouse that scream, this is your community, this isn't just another country club? And just an example of what an artifact could be, do you have a most beautiful thing poster in your boathouse? If not, they didn't pay me. Just go to the shop, you know, get a movie poster, or get a photo of Catherine Reddick rowing, get a photo of Akil rowing, get get photos of the kids from PCR rowing. You need to have your community represented in your boathouse if you want them coming into your boathouse and feeling like they belong. And going with what Jessica said before, I mean, you said that, I mean, racism is a, I'm going to say a bold statement here. Racism is a white people problem. And I'm just going to let that sink in, because I, the Asian American, is saying that. And granted, there are some privileges, et cetera, but that's a whole nother conversation. But racism is a white people problem. And when you look at the history of just law in America, if your rights have ever been on the table at the Supreme Court and no rights have ever been debated hotly, even to this day, more than African Americans, more than Black people to this day, and that is the problem of the folks who stole this country off of native land. So when Arshay, when you talk about like, how do we make the boathouse welcome, we think about how those things, part of our American culture, trickle into American rowing. And Jessica, you mentioned, now I remember what you were talking about, but if youth are bringing things up that happened, I can tell you, as someone who has worked with middle schoolers, who is the size of a middle schooler, as someone who has worked and listened to middle schoolers, and I'm sure, Horley, you can back me up on this, they have second-guessed themselves already. They have already asked themselves, I don't really want to bring this up. I don't want to cause any trouble. You know, I don't want to get anyone in trouble. I really don't want to bring this up. And the fact that they have already vetted their doubts to the point where they're bringing this up to you, you have no right, whoever you are, and I call it whoever you are, you have no right to question them and say, are you sure they didn't mean it like that? Are you sure they weren't just, no. They knew what they were doing and they caught it. No matter how young the rower is, 12, 13, 14, they caught it. They can catch it. They are smarter than we give them any credit for. And so those little things, those little microaggressions, we really need to understand, and we really need to recognize that when folks bring things up, we need to listen. Because if we're not listening, then there's no conversation. There's no discussion. There's no side of the street where both folks can have an equitable conversation where both sides are listening.
Yeah.
Wow.
No. Thank you for that, Denise. That is just so important. We all know as rowers who sat and spent a lot of time on that erg machine. To get the results that you want in the 2K, you have to be uncomfortable the whole time to get the results you want. In order to get the results we want as a sport, when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and solving the race problems and the race issues in our sport, we have to be uncomfortable. That will help us get the results that we want. I was talking to a college coach a couple of weeks ago on Zoom, and he's been a college coach for a very long time. And you know, we was just talking about his team dynamic and some issues that came up. And I asked him, I said, when 9/11 happened, did you meet and reflect with your team? Said, absolutely. When that terrorist attack happened in France, that everyone here was affected by, did you reflect with your team? Yes. When COVID happened, did you reflect with your team? Yes. You have people of color in your team. Yes. When George Floyd was murdered by what the world considered American hero, did you sit and reflect with the whole team? And the answer was no. Right? And I think that for me as an athlete, I would have left. I would have walked out the doors. And there's been many times in the sport and as an employee in the sport that I felt not heard. And I think it's super important that we begin to have those uncomfortable conversations and make sure that everyone is heard. And another lesson I learned from the sport, that I can't do the work of 8 people, but I need 8 people to do the work. And then we'll get there much faster. So we have to include everybody, every person, no matter who they are, where they're from, in the conversation and hear them out in order to move forward. Now I want to go to you, Horley. I haven't heard from you in a while. And so my question for you is this. How important is youth development, cultural competency, and the conversation around race? And the role of coaching is important to that's trying to diversify. How do we balance being, some people would say, you know what, I'm not a competitive team. We're not a competitive team. We just have to focus on youth development because they're going through a lot, right? And some people would say, hey, to be competitive, we can't focus on all these other issues that's going around in the community. We don't have time to talk to parents. We don't have time to talk about what people are going through. Or coaches will say, leave it on the dock, right? And just focus on the speed. How do you find a balance? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's an ongoing theme here about discomfort. And I wouldn't be surprised, like, if maybe some folks who are hearing our conversations now might feel this uncomfortable, right? And so I think just fundamentally, I just want to highlight the fact that from all the rowers that I've come across, the sport of rowing and the spirit of it, I've seen it truly adapted adopted as a way of life, as a way of approaching other things about life, right? And so, I mean, this should be no different, right? So I just want anyone who may feel right now as where, you know, maybe some of the things that are being said are hitting a nerve with them, or they may be feeling like, oh, I've heard this side. Oh, it sounds like a lot of complaining, or that really isn't as big of an issue as they may be saying it is, right? So I just kind of want folks to kind of open their mind a little bit fundamentally to be able to kind of absorb this. So with regard to the youth development, it oftentimes in the sport, or in different sports, sometimes coaches feel that the teaching of the sport alone is youth development, that there isn't anything additionally needed to be added to that, right? So there's just a misunderstanding of what youth development is. And so, but if you have conversations amongst coaches and we're talking about the progress of how one of the rowers are doing, there's been so many times where they, you know, I've heard coaches say, oh, you know, so-and-so would be great if once they hit that next maturity level, they're really going to be able to become a leader in their boat. Or, oh yeah, that rower, look, you know, they're having a hard time, and I think today is just an off day, right? Or even if it's a coach themselves, hey, I'm sorry I lashed out. I don't know if all coaches have apologized for lashing out, but if they say, I'm sorry for lashing out at you all, I've had a bad day, right? It's there. It's every day. It's what are the influences that exist that are outside of the boathouse, that can influence who we are and how we are during practice or during a race, right? And to you, what you mentioned about leaving things on the dock, at some point you're going to return to the dock, right? I mean, it's still going to be there waiting for you. So in understanding that, like, the relationship between the coach and the rowers is that much stronger when they're in unison, no different from how the rowers are with each other in the boat. And so youth development is helping the rowers become more resilient. And how do you do that? Is by understanding what their challenges are. And that's where the competency comes in, right? If you don't understand what their challenges are, if you don't understand that they may be helping with their family business in addition to going to school, or babysitting their little sister because their mom is working late night shifts, or having to cook for their family and things like that, that are additional hurdles that maybe other rowers don't experience. You know, those are some of the competencies that we may assume that, oh, that rower has a behavior issue. Yeah, they may be grumpy, they may be combative, but that's because, you know, they've only slept 3 hours that night, or they had to do all this additional stuff, or they had to avoid getting jumped getting over to the boathouse and having to go back to their house, you know. So it's really critical to be able to have these conversations, and for the staff not to feel personally attacked, just to be able to look in the mirror and say, hey, you know, it doesn't mean that I'm a bad rowing coach. It's not that you're a bad rowing coach. It's just that there's more to learn, just like the rowers have more to learn. And just the spirit of that there's always room for improvement, and you're always seeking that you know, perfection. It's no different as a coach, and you should want to achieve that as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Early. So we only have 8 minutes left. And what I want to do is I want to make sure I get everyone 1 minute to go ahead and leave the audience with action step or last thoughts. But and then I'm going to take it away, and then we're going to end it with Catherine. But again, I want you guys to think about all that we have talked about, and I wish we had more time, but we don't. But just last minute thoughts in 1 minute. I want to start with you, Jessica.
I think I'll just say I liked how, you kind of came back to the idea of, being open to hearing, making these mistakes. But just as a coach, don't let the guilt of failing an athlete get between you and being a better coach. Like, check the pride and the ego, which is hard, like, for coaches, but really just kind of hear it and be open to that change, and listen and be vulnerable with your athletes and be willing to admit when, I don't know, or I've made a mistake, or, just be kind of willing to say that out loud to your athletes and to your parents, and make that opening for them, that they know that you're just trying to make an opportunity for their kids and your students. Anyway, I think I'm emotionally tapped out right now. So I'm not speaking in complete sentences, but I will pass it along to someone more eloquent. So.
Thank you, Jessica. Louis?
Yeah, there was a question earlier about the value of diversification. And I really want to touch on that, because I think there's a misunderstanding that any effort to diversify is like a handout or some sort of affirmative action, right? And it's totally not. The diversity, and as mentioned, the inclusion, preparing for that diversity, it's more than tokenism. There is an amazing talent pool out there that has been really left untouched, and I really would hope folks to misunderstand the efforts of trying to develop inclusion as a way that it's like it's just a favor. It's not a favor. Every single individual on the boat earns their seat. So, and that will never change. And so that's I just really want folks to really consider that, and just know that not everyone has to earn their seat, but not everyone starts at the same place. And so that's where the equity would come in. And so just be prepared to really be ready to work with those youth, because there's so much potential, there's so much power, that together and how they would learn from each other, not just the peers, not just the rowers, but what can be learned from what the coaches can learn from the rowers and vice versa. It's just extremely valuable. And I think if we continue this direction as a sport as a whole, as a national sport, man, there's just going to be a huge progress, amazing waves that that can be made together.
Awesome. Denise?
Thank you again to you, Arshay, and everyone on this panel, and the head of the school for hosting this conversation. I think it's so important, definitely not the last to be had. Two things I want to leave everyone with. One is listen. I'm not just saying that as a founder of a podcast, but it's just amazing what we'll hear when we aren't thinking about what to say next. And I want to just leave you with that. Listen, and it's amazing what you'll hear when you aren't just thinking about what you'll say next. The second thing is grow. As coaches, let's give what we get every day. We as coaches get to witness and see our athletes grow and learn, and not just become better rowers, but better people, better teammates, better members of our society. And so let's demonstrate that as well. Let's do that too. And I think if you're on YouTube and you're already thinking, what am I going to watch next? There's this coach, Pete Carroll, coach of Seattle Seahawks. I don't do football, sorry. But he has he openly talks about how much he has grown and how open and vocal he is about Colin Kaepernick in a way that not many football coaches are now or have been 5 years ago. And last, I know I said to listen, grow. I mean, there's a lot to be done. I know we talked a lot about white people, but folks of color can also have races, can also kind of be racist too. And I think that growth can also happen for everyone, not just, I don't want white folks to just feel, fragile or attacking anything. It's everyone. It's everyone. Because we cannot climb the ladder unless we are lifting at the same time. So climb as we lift. Thank you, everyone.
It's almost 8. Richard, 1 minute. If you can give us 1 minute.
Oh boy, here we go, like a roller coaster ride. So really quickly, if you're going to try to be more diverse and inclusive in your boathouse, you can't just add people of color. You have to reshape the power structure of what your organization is. It's been proven by Harvard studies, but just by adding Black and brown people, that does not change your bottom line. What changes your bottom line is that you change who you are as an organization. Couple things to take away. Avoid assumptions. Ask yourself and others questions. Challenge the stereotypes of your own and within your boathouse. And also be strongly aware of your privileges. Done.
Awesome. And I want to end by saying this, that I listened to a lot of podcasts with NBA players, NFL players, and baseball players. And they all talked about the best coaches measure success outside of the sport, what they do for their athletes outside of the sport, which makes a really, really great coach. And at times I felt like I wasn't a winner because we didn't win a lot gold medals, right? But how do we measure success is what I want to ask. Is impact greater than medals? Is medals greater than impact? Although we didn't win the gold medal, right? The success that our city, that our community want was how do we get different gang members to interact? You all saw the film. We was able to accomplish that. How do we get people, Black people, to culturally overcome this fear of water? We was able to accomplish that. How do we get young people who have to take the bus all the way from the west side of Chicago to the Lincoln Park Lagoon and be committed? We were able to accomplish that. How do we get young people to understand and activate their entrepreneurial mindset and go back to the same community and hire people from that community? We was able to accomplish that. We measure success not only by what we do in the water, but outside of the water. We've moved from being athletes to influential. When you think of Harriet Tubman, you don't think about her career as a Union spy. You think about the freedom she represented. When you think about Gandhi, you don't think about his career as a lawyer, but the peace he brought to the world. When you think about MLK, you don't think about him pastoring the church as his career, but you think about the hope that he brought to the world. When you represent something bigger than yourself, bigger than the water, true change happens. If I ask anyone in this sport, what is the one thing in one word that they learned from their coach? They would say determination. They would say teamwork, right? They would say courage. They would not say erging. They would not say feathering. But those are the words that we learn every day with our team. And I hope that we can use those same lessons to bring change to our sport. And I want to leave you with that, and the last thing I would say is that to the school, thank you for hosting this event and making this happen. That shows progress, right? And to the rowing world, I hope and pray that you stay inspired. This year, our sport have caught a real big crab. And we all know crabs come to stop us from moving forward. We wasn't able to see the water. We wasn't able to accomplish all our goals. But we all know as rowers that to not let the crab knock us out of the boat, but to fight through it. And just like COVID, sometimes when it's out of control, we have to lay back and let it pass, but then get back at it and keep hustling and keep going after it. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rowing World. And I hope that you embrace the words that you heard today, but I truly, truly believe that we will make an impact in this sport. On to you, Catherine.
Oh, hi, guys. I'll be very brief, but I just want to thank our panelists for this excellent and honest discussion. And thank you to the head of the Schuylkill for committing the proceeds of their virtual race entries to Philadelphia City Rowing. For audience members interested in contributing financially to the work of transforming the rowing community, you can search for Arshay's A Most Beautiful Thing Foundation, Please also consider going to philadelphiacityrowing.org. We're in the middle of our annual appeal. It's been a tough year and we could use all of your support. And if you want to keep learning and hear more conversations like this, please check out Denise on the Rowing in Color podcast. The issues we talked about tonight affect rowing, but most are much bigger than this sport. And if you were moved by any of the people you heard tonight, I implore you, on November 3rd, please vote to support their work, their safety, their livelihoods, and their lives. Because public school educators, social workers, and people of color, we are carrying this country on our backs, and we have been for too long. If you've been inspired to keep learning, to donate, or to do something that is excellent, but please make voting the first thing. Thank you.